You're welcome.
Let me pull up my presentation. Everyone can see okay? Great.
Yes. We're all set. Perfect.
Perfect. Thanks so much. It's really wonderful to be here with you all. Just want to thank Aubrey and Virginia and the entirety of the Feminist Spatial Practice community for both the invite and for hosting my practice share today. I'm joining you all from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Gabrielino Tongva people, who have historically inhabited the area around present-day Pasadena. I pay respects to the traditional caretakers of this land, their ancestors, elders, and relations past, present, and forthcoming. And I also recognize that land acknowledgement is limited and requires us to engage in an ongoing process of learning and accountability through action. In terms of structure, I'll start really by addressing the general questions that are guiding my creative practice. I'll show how these questions manifest in some recent projects, and we'll briefly touch on the methodologies that I lean on in that pursuit, as it, I think, connects to the world building workshop to come that you all are going to be hosting. Since I'm also an academic, and depending on time, you will tell me, I might end with the ways in which these questions and methodologies trickle into my work in academia through my teaching and my lab. If not, I can kind of scroll through slides, and if there's any questions on those, I can always go back during the conversation session. I've written notes to keep myself on track so as not to ramble too much, but I'll jump back and forth between those and less structured ways of presenting, just to keep it fresh. As Virginia mentioned, I'm an environmental designer and bioartist with training in architecture, landscape architecture, and media arts. Through a feminist new materialist lens and deploying arts-based research, I investigate the entanglements of human and non-human life, as well as our approach to planetary threats, challenging typical techno-scientific solutions to environmental crises and reimagining more ethical ways forward. My work, as executed through creative practice, written scholarship, my research lab, and teaching, aims to torque our imaginaries to help us rethink our interactions with both human and non-human agents on this planet. The primary intellectual concern of my work thus focuses on both materialist perspectives on the living world of landscape matter and the practice of imagining and imaging landscape, addressing both landscape's material and its representation. In my arts-based practice, I work with living systems, biological organisms, and atmospheric phenomena to explore multi-species entanglements across scales. My work utilizes such, go back, sometimes this gets stuck, there we go. My work utilizes such biomedia as a means of critically problematizing human exceptionalism. In other words, I interrogate how humans' relationship with the more than human world might be transformed by working collaboratively with living organisms to create new relational possibilities for the future. The agency of biomedia and landscape matter more generally requires new methods of study or alternative modes of research and practice. I therefore study, use, and produce knowledge with and through expanded media, including living media, to probe this new ontological and political conjecture in my work. Initiated through a doctorate in media arts and practice at the School of Cinematic Arts at USC, where I focused on living and moist media as a new arena for environmental design inquiry and practice, this area of design research has yielded speculative proposals for how we might live in stronger and mutually beneficial interdependence with the rest of the biophysical world. Termed bioart or biodesign, this burgeoning subfield incorporates living matter and living organisms as essential components of design, moving beyond imitation and mimicry and toward integration and use. I've designed and developed a variety of projects incorporating biomedia in the past 5 years. For the purposes of time, I'll share 3 examples. And I decided to focus today's talk on built work predominantly, so I'm leaving some of the proposals that I typically share out this time, and we'll see we'll see how that goes. Biologics is the first project I'll share. It was commissioned in 2021 by Oxy Arts for a show curated by Mashinga Firunz Hakopian and Mildia Yesayan, which was focusing on the encoded biases of AI systems and the ways they magnify existing structural inequalities. I was invited to integrate questions around ecology into the show and was specifically asked to intervene in the reading room of the gallery space. I wanted to critique the sources of knowledge that have coded and shaped the Western perspective on the rest of the biophysical world. So in this context, biologics seeded alternate knowledge systems within the pages of books related to Western philosophy, science, and systems of thinking derived from the European Enlightenment to attune the visitor instead to the collective intelligence of plant matter. This was a site-specific installation in the reading room of the gallery space as mentioned, and it deliberately intervened in very specific books. And these were seeded with symbiotic species of plants which grew directly from the books hydroponically. What can plant intelligence teach us about more interconnected and relational ways of being? Can we counter the reductiveness of Western science and its contribution to plant blindness, particularly the inability to see the agency of plants as intelligent, living, and sociable beings? These were some of the questions I wanted to pose with this work. Last fall, a second and slightly different iteration of the show opened at the Ford Foundation Gallery in New York City. My piece, Botanic Attunement, elaborated on the questions raised in the first iteration and added an interactive element to the experience, asking visitors to feed the plants that were on display. While Western anthropocentric perspectives treat nature as other to be extracted and exploited, Botanic Attunement invites interaction through the delivery of nutrient feed, offering visitors a means to participate in collective expressions of care shared within interdependent webs of life. This piece was living and continued to kind of shift and grow over the duration of the show as it ran from September to December, and as visitors continued to feed and nourish the plants. In this next project titled In Kinship with the Oak, another living system is foregrounded. This was a commission for Grant Park in downtown LA as part of We Rise, creating the next LA kickoff to Mental Health Awareness Month, completed in 2022. Situated in Grant Park, whose design celebrates the world's botanic geographies as representative of the cultural diversity of Los Angeles, we make space for the essentiality of the oak to our region's past and our city's future. Despite having various trees that the park celebrates in connection to the diverse communities, cultural communities of LA, it strangely omits this key species for the Native American community whose ancestral lands the park sits on. By monumentalizing through repetition the young oaks, we hope to bring attention to its truly fundamental presence. In creating our next LA, we acknowledge that the land of the Los Angeles Basin was the traditional and is the traditional unceded territory of the Tongva peoples, for whom the oak was and still is essential, for food most especially, but also medicine, basketry, dyes, toys, construction, etc. Here we hope to learn from this truly interspecies relationship to envision what health and healing can be in a post-crisis city. So here let me go to the diagram really fast. Here, essentially, we created a kind of microforest with 3 clearings. There's kind of 3 groves with 3 clearings in the center to create kind of a shady place to sit and have lunch amidst this stretch of territory between 2 planted areas in the park that was entirely concrete to create a kind of space of again, shade and rest amidst the in the summer months, amidst the kind of busy thoroughfare area that this site is typically used for. And while perhaps more a grove, I'll go back to these, while perhaps more a grove or orchard than a stand of oaks as in a woodland, the intention for the abstracted forest was to immerse yet acknowledge the highly altered context of downtown LA as the starting point for rethinking the future. Just as the oak supports a great diversity of microbial to mammalian life and everything in between, in this abstracted forest in a vastly creative city, it attracts artwork and a diversity of public encounters. And some of these were, the canopy was utilized by LA Commons, which is an LA arts organization for programming efforts. So the shells that you're seeing, this was a public program that was done with community youth. And then these were hung on the canopy. And the butterflies that you're seeing were the work of artists Sonia Romero and others who used, again, the canopy as a, to display the artwork that they created. And here's a quick kind of walk through the grove and the experience that one would have in this canopy. What was really interesting, it was a temporary exhibit, and yet there was actual birds that created nests in the canopy as well. So it really did attract not only kind of public and human encounters, but also more than human encounters as well. The trees were, after the event, the trees were donated to a nursery that then shared them all with tree poor neighborhoods around LA. So there was kind of an afterlife to this project as well. In this next project, titled Gibijana, constructed for a string quartet performance at the American Academy in Rome in 2018, the project brings the animate quality of water as landscape matter to life through light and projection. Using high intensity light, the water's liquid life is made manifest through its reflection and through the movement of bodies of performers. So here I was working with two ideas simultaneously that I was quite interested in exploring. One was the idea of water as an archive, or what is often called water memory, the suggestion that water notes or registers all the external influences that have acted upon it. And the kind of interest in the muscular act of making music. So I was really interested in the way in which our bodies have to conform to the kinds of instruments that we essentially play for these string quartet that the piece was designed around. So here we designed this really analog piece of infrastructure due to budgetary issues, where each of the performers in the string quartet were attached with a bracelet that had a kind of a system that activated a pulley system in the central fountain that we wrapped in this fabric. And as the performers played their instruments, this pulley system would agitate the water in particular ways. And then this reflection through high intensity light was then screened and reflected back onto the screens that we used to cover the central fountain. Here's a quick video to get a sense of what it felt like. So different instruments obviously are played differently. And so the more intense strumming of this water phone activated and agitated the water more drastically. So this was an ever shifting kind of visual field, visual kind of performance. The central staircase at the Academy was used as informal seating for the event. And the piece created both a kind of sonic and a visual immersive environment for the audience members. So here I want to transition to a three-part design series and forthcoming book that I've been developing since 2019 that grapples more intimately with multi-species relationality. Taking on human-induced environmental catastrophe that impacts species and landscape processes across scales, from the microscopic to the atmospheric, This work attempts to make palpable the psychically distant worlds of the microbiome and the Arctic ice sheets, bringing climate stress and adaptation into the physical and corporeal realities of our everyday lives. Interrogating the position of the human in our environmental future, the series presents 3 design prototypes that catalyze or require new rituals that force humans out of their exploitative relationship with the more than human world and obligate them to collaborate and thus co-evolve toward more inclusive and ethical models for living. Each prototype engages an element of landscape matter, focusing on the future of food production, chapter 1 and the first prototype on food, the diminishing security of our global water system, chapter 2 and the second prototype engaging water, and soil degradation and depletion, chapter 3 and the third prototype that's grappling with waste. The work projects a mode of environmental existence that dismantles the idea of human exceptionalism and demonstrates the complex webs of life upon which humans depend. It recognizes the precarity of life on our planet as human-induced climate change accelerates planetary decline and forces us to imagine how our possible and inevitable extinction might constructively contribute to life without us. Here you're seeing the thematic connections between the 3 prototypes and the funding sources and consultants that each prototype is engaging. So it's a highly collaborative, it has been a highly collaborative endeavor engaging consultants from the sciences as well as neighboring disciplines, which you'll get to see as I share each of these. But there's also a material, these are also connected kind of metabolically and materially through kind of shared matter, which you'll see also as I share the prototypes with you. Let's see, here we are. While this work is informed by feminist new materialism and queer theory, it is also deeply personal and rooted in lived experience. I conceived of the first prototype titled Posthuman Habitats following the birth of my daughter Zabel, a time when I was keenly aware and astounded by my body's ability to produce and deliver the exact nutrients that she required. I began to wonder how we might use our bodies to feed more than just our kin. Posthuman Habitats, the first design prototype in the series, was fabricated in 2018 while in residence at the American Academy in Rome as a Rome Prize Fellow in conversation with a hydroponics expert, a fashion designer, and chef. Posthuman Habitats presents a wearable and edible landscape system powered and fertilized by human waste and doubling as an expanded ecosystem that attracts and integrates other animal and insect life. Here you're seeing all the trophic levels of organisms that are part of our food production that largely go unnoticed. So these are organisms from the microbial scale to the pollinator scale that are essential for our food to actually grow. So this entire network is actually necessary, and we don't necessarily think about the labor involved in our food production, but we certainly don't also think about this complex web of life that's also essential. So in a way, functioning as kind of a second skin, because we have to, the kind of future scenario that this piece was grappling with was some future state that if we continue to deplete our soils to the extent that we have, that we might not be able to grow our food in the ground, how might we survive was another question it was trying to kind of answer. So if we're bringing food production to our bodies and using bodily waste in this process, it's also becoming, we're also kind of essentially using the body as a habitat for all the organisms that are essential to food production. Food is the composite web of the technical, ethical, cultural, and affective. It is also the material embodiment of an increasingly complex but largely invisible assemblage of trophic encounters between different living species. Yet humans have intellectually positioned themselves outside the food chain despite being host to millions of microbial organisms that are both nourished by our interiors and exteriors and are essential to our survival. The project imagines a new set of more than human customs and practices emergent around the cultivation, preparation, and consumption of food, which is a radical break from the complex commodity chains and industrialized farming and eating. Yet rather than a nostalgic desire to return to the natural economies of pre-industrial societies, the speculation responds to a new planetary landscape of depleted soils and the increasing threat of food insecurity. The project addresses a way of living and dying in the ruins of what we've created as a collaborative landscape practice of feeding each other. So these prototypes actually functioned. It's probably the architect in me that wants to ensure that all the prototypes that I design do function, even though they might not really have a purpose in this world yet. So these worked hydroponically. All these plants were grown. Each cloak produced about 40 pounds of crop, and 22 different crops were grown. Everything from strawberries to nasturtium to broccoli rabe, radish, even peanuts, and some mushrooms were grown on these. And during the opening night of the gallery, I worked with the chefs of the Rome Sustainable Food Project, who harvested one of the cloaks, and these were passed around as finger foods during the opening night of the exhibit. Post-human habitats has since received global coverage through exhibitions, awards, and press. So these are some of them that you're seeing, and kind of went a little bit viral on the internets. And the work was also additionally featured recently in a German children's book, Unsere Zukunft Träumen und Gestalten. Probably butchered that, which translates to dreaming and designing our future, which encourages youth to think creatively and critically about their environmental future. The second prototype in the series, titled Transcorporal Atmospheres, is the design of water production mechanisms within human fungal networks to address issues around water access and scarcity. Rather than a solution-driven narrative, such as those derivative from hydroengineering and global water management regimes, Transcorporal Atmospheres instead attempts to evoke an ongoing engagement with a water world in flux. So here, if we were all in one space together and not on Zoom, you would all be inhaling my exhale as I spoke in the same room with you. So every breath we put out into the world is not only continuously shared and transferred between bodies, but also contains about 4 to 6.3% water that we put out into the atmosphere. So theoretically, if we were to harvest each of our exhales, each of our bodies could produce about 1 liter of water per day. And if we scale this up to a community of 50, it becomes quite a lot of kind of a substantial amount of water that our bodies could generate. So here the project creates a communal sphere of vapor, taking the form of an undulating vessel, which encloses an inner moist environment that enables organisms, especially shiitake mushroom, to grow and be sustained by human breath. And I'll explain why shiitake. It's actually, there's 2 reasons. One is the fact that shiitake mushrooms are a known filter, particularly of water. So as this vessel collects moisture from our breath, the shiitake mushroom would be able to filter the impurities from this, dehumanizing it to some extent for a collective use of a kind of hydro community that would be created. The second reason is that common to desert animals and plants that have adapted to low water conditions, shiitake mushroom undergoes this process called metabolic water production. So as it's burning away the sugars, eating away at the sugars on the strata that it grows on, it actually generates water in its body. This is a kind of survival mechanism that desert animals and plants have developed. And this is also specific to the shiitake. It generates water and then it secretes it out of its body. So in essence, this is a vessel that allows collaboration between humans and specifically the shiitake to generate water, both from the human breath, as well as this process of metabolic water production. Transcorporal Atmospheres thus explores what it means to share our breath and what the water it contains with the multi-species world. Here, it was really important for me to work with glass to create the vessel, because the breath is used to especially blown glass. Breath is used as kind of as a creative agent to shape it. So it's quite important for me to work with this medium. Sorry, this was the diagram that was supposed to that I was supposed to show that talked about the shiitake producing water that it dutates out of its body that you're seeing at the bottom circle there. So I found an artist that was kind of close to LA and working in San Bernardino, Aya Oki, who herself had a series that she had produced called the Breathing Series, where she took a tile, glass, kind of a glass square, and let out one exhale and deformed that glass tile. And I thought there was a connection here with regards to the concepts we were both exploring. So I cold called her, which I do a lot, and not always does it work out. But in this instance, Aya decided she wanted to collaborate. And so the form of the shell was actually developed parametrically based on conversations with a microbiologist and mycologist about the kinds of forms that would be most productive to activate both transpiration, but also collect and transfer through a capillary effect the moisture from the breath. And then after these were generated parametrically, I worked with Aya to essentially fabricate these through glass. And inside you're seeing the tubing that would take the moisture from the breath and deliver it to the outer edges of the vessel. I'll move forward. So the shell itself has openings that connect to that inner network of tubes. And essentially you would bring your mouth to these openings and exhale into them. And as you exhale, again, the capillary effect goes into effect and it pulls the moisture from the breath and feeds it to the shiitake. The work, which was developed in consultation with the renowned mycologist and microbiologist Han Vosten from the University of Utrecht, was recently fabricated as part of the creative science track at New Inc., the art and technology incubator of the New Museum of New York City, in collaboration with glass artist Aya Oki, which I just mentioned. And it was already, here you're seeing the vessel with the openings and the tubing and the mushroom, some other views. The glow light you're seeing is a blue light, which is helpful to the growth of the shiitake as well. These were shortlisted. This project was shortlisted for the Bio Art and Design Awards, the highest recognition in the bio design field, as well as being published in LA Plus, Interdisciplinary Journal of Landscape Architecture, and awarded an honorable mention in the International Design Ideas Competition Preacher. Now, as part of the New Ink experience, which I mentioned, there was a year-end exhibition where we had to showcase the work that we had created during the program. And the venue that they gave us, however, was Pier 17 at the South Street Seaport in New York City. And given that the piece was really designed to be in a kind of intimate, smaller setting, interior and intimate setting of a kind of domestic space, I had to translate how and think of some other way of addressing the project without necessarily showing the system that was designed. So here I designed and constructed this scaffolding system, which itself is gridded to kind of hint at the repetitive nature of breathing, that would hold 60 bottles, and each bottle would be 1 day's worth of water, liquid, that was generated through this collaboration with the shiitake from one of the prototypes that I had developed. So I collected 60 days worth of liquid breath that was communally generated and exhibited those as part of the New Ink end of year demo festival. So the scaffolding, again, is kind of a repetitive grid structure, repetition of the behavior of interacting with the shiitake as well as breathing. And here you're seeing what that felt like. And as the atmospherics around the pier changed, so did the effect that these gave. And not every day was an equal amount, depending on who was breathing into how many people breathed into the prototype, as well as how often it was done. It generated different amounts of water, which is what you're seeing, the variation that you're seeing here. Some more shots. And it was lit up during the night. So here you're seeing some of the night shots as well. This was featured in the Brooklyn Rail, this project, on a piece that Charlotte Kent wrote that was looking at artists who are working with water in the wake of some really problematic Supreme Court decisions that were made around water rights. So the piece was included along with other really incredible artists' pieces around water. That was really quite exciting. The final design prototype in the Near Extinction Ritual series, titled Future Kin, considers the material waste of death, particularly in the face of mass species extinction. Death here is framed not as an endpoint, but as an active material process of decay and recomposition. Future Kin imagines how the more than human bodies that will accumulate from human misdeeds will not be wasted. They will be mourned in new rituals of grief that aim to catalyze ethical thinking and mobilize action. So here, if the first prototype is asking, how can we use our bodies to feed more than just our kin? And the second prototype is asking, what does it mean to share our breath with the multi-species world? This one is essentially asking how we might die well in the mess that we've made. This is under development currently. It's going to be showed at the Pasadena Armory next month. So it's very close to being completed as part of Getty's Pacific Standard Time LA program, which is exploring art science collaborations. This speculation engages the underground food chain and considers the types of future relationships that we might form with the soil biome, putting in place acts of care that go beyond exploitative and instrumentally regimented forms of stewardship. It considers how our bodies in death could facilitate this new form of coexistence and how design could enable and accommodate this necessary exchange. As mentioned, the piece is currently being developed towards an exhibit. And I'm not going to give away too many specifics here, but I've been working with an ethno-entomologist here, a choreographer, and a death doula. And we just completed a programming effort at the Armory where we were exploring collective grief in the context of the chaos of the world currently, both with regards to human and more than human catastrophes that are happening. And we were working with the material of clay as both an agent of healing as well as a material that's based on kind of landscape matter. So not to give away too much, but the main question here that I'm really interested, or the main concept here that I'm really interested in probing, and I'm beginning to probe and will surely continue past this project, is the fact that majority of the microbial life that is in our gut is also found in the soil biome. And it's not just soil that we've come into contact in our lifetimes as individuals, but it's actually passed down through the mother's side in childbirth. And so really in our gut, we hold ancestral soils. And for someone as an Armenian who has been expunged from our ancestral lands due to genocide, it's a really immensely significant concept to kind of work with as a creative. If you're in LA, please come to the opening of this, but I won't say too much anymore for now. All three prototypes prioritize the more than human species and systems that have been exploited or rendered mute by the inseparability of advanced capitalism and the colonial project. The fabrication and production of this hybrid work is being supported by a research and architecture grant received from USC Architecture in 2020. And portions of the scholarship have also been packaged as chapters in 2 forthcoming publications. The first focusing on prodding the predetermined through acts of speculation as a chapter in contemporary absurdities, existential crises, and visual art, and another investigating the potential of biomedia and technology in charting new futures in biomatter technosynthetics, design futures for the more than human. Writing is an important and interesting part of my process. Oftentimes when I hit a kind of creative wall in the making process, I'll turn to writing and I'll start to kind of write creatively about the work as if it was a story. And oftentimes this not only reframes what I'm doing, but also opens up new areas to explore. So process-wise, it's I don't necessarily only save the writing to the end, but it's also part of my creative process. I know we're getting close to the time, so I'll jump into the methodologies very briefly. And then I won't go into my lab or my teaching. And if there's questions in the Q&A conversation portion, I can jump to those if there's any interest. So methodology-wise, while bio, geo, and hydroengineering technologies have been developed and proposed to solve the environmental crises created by industrialized nations, my research and teaching aim to provide an alternative to these so-called fixes by inspiring us to imagine a more compassionate and collaborative form of earthly inhabitation. So moving away from technoscientific methodologies towards methods used in future studies. Briefly, future studies is the systematic and pattern-based study and interrogation of complex world systems and structures for the purposes of generating possibilities for how we might exist and function in the future, as well as pathways to arrive there. Perhaps one of the field's most significant aims is to pluralize the future, creating narratives that provide a range of alternatives to those that have been imagined for us. Introducing futures studies to landscape architecture and the environmental design fields expands their working methods as fields best equipped to address the climate crisis. However, our capacity as designers to collectively imagine possible or alternative futures is low, given that we're trained not to question society's fundamental systems, including global capitalism, Western conceptions of time, space, and power, and value, and so forth. The projective potentials of the use of futures methodologies within the environmental design disciplines, therefore, is not only useful, but critical if we're to meaningfully respond to the complex, entangled, and multi-scalar challenges that we are collectively facing as a species, as a society, and as a planet. So one of the things that, how I got into these methods was through my PhD work at the World Building Media Lab at USC Cinema, where I was a research associate. And there, the aim was, it's run by production designer Alex McDowell. So the orientation that it's kind of working for, the fields that it's working in service of are actually kind of movies. So here, fictional worlds are being created through these processes. And there's multiple methodologies that the lab explored, from gameplay to role play, et cetera. But the aim was to always create kind of fictional worlds. And what I've done is essentially take some of these methodologies and adapt them to respond to our current context and to perhaps move beyond the ways in which we've been approaching questions around the climate crisis, and possibly come up with more interesting ways of addressing those, more ethical ways of addressing those. I've written also about the methodologies I'm introducing to the field in various capacities, and I'm regularly invited as a landscape futures practitioner and domain expert to consult on futures-oriented design, most recently on projects for Nike, examining the future of athleticism, the Ford Motor Company examining the future of zero-emission cities, the Michelson Center for Convergent Bioscience, and most recently for work completed for the Wallace Annenberg Theater in Santa Monica for a theater production of King Lear, which was set in 2030, for which I was brought in to synthesize the socio-environmental context that would define the next decade. I recently also completed some future of AI work through Google research that I have to include into a future slide that is missing from this one. The alternative environmental futures that I've generated through these methods in my own design research studio for Grand Design Agency have been exhibited across the world, including at Ars and Electronica, Hyundai Motor Studio in Beijing, Eli and Edith Broad Museum Art Lab, Science Gallery Detroit, the Museum of the City of New York, AIA Center for Architecture, South by Southwest, and A&D Museum, among others. So the exhibits provide a venue to share this work with a greater public, which is the dominant form of dissemination that I engage in. I'll stop here. There's these methodologies translate into the lab that I lead. If you're interested, you can check that out, as well as my teaching, which tends to be at the ecological scale. And my lab is at the kind of biological material scale. So there's multiple scales from the microscopic in the lab to the ecological in my teaching to the body scale in my own creative practice that I engage. But I'll end here because I want to leave some time for a conversation and we can chat. I'll stop share.
Yeah, thank you so much, Aroussiak. So as the moderator, I definitely came prepared with some questions, and I came up with a lot more questions during your presentation. I also feel that our audience probably has quite a few questions. So audience members, if you do have questions, feel free to either type them into the chat if that's what you're comfortable with, or if you would like to turn on your video and ask in person, just raise your hand or make a note in the chat and I can call on you to kind of ask your question. But I will start it off because I do have so many questions. And I think for me personally, I think one thing that was so interesting about your work is working with all these multi-collaborators, not necessarily the human collaborators like the chefs and
Uh-oh.
I think she's frozen for me too. She was asking a good question.
It was. I can talk about collaborations, but I wonder what the. Oh, you're back.
You're back.
sorry, you lost me right at
We
that.
lost you at chefs.
Yeah, so I'm actually not interested in the chefs. I'm interested in the other collaborators like the plants and the water and water vapor, air. Like, how do you collaborate with these materials or these other living systems like worms or birds that start to nest in your project or something? And what is maybe spontaneous about that? And not only thinking of these non-human collaborators as like natural elements, but also as artificial intelligence elements. So like, I would like to know more about those relationships.
Yeah, great question. One of the things that I can say about the working with other species is that, and thank goodness for my landscape architecture training, which has, essentially you have to be okay with your design shifting. So things as I sketched them, these concepts as I sketched them had to completely change as I started to work with and collaborate with the organisms that were designed into these, because they had an agenda of their own and they had behavior of their own that I had to accommodate in the designs. So to give an example, for the second project, the transcorporeal atmospheres, there was one vessel that got contaminated. And so this entire, the shiitake, this utopian idea that this was gonna, be a method of survival, got turned upside down. Other kinds of systems found kind of viable home in it and started to take over. And I had to be okay with that. And in fact, because of that experience, in the book that I'm writing, there's a whole kind of sub-chapter on unintended contamination and contagion as a kind of generative agent. So all that to say is that you have to be really flexible, and there has to be a collaborative, a truly collaborative nature to this effort of working with other species, where it's not like you're directing and you're only incorporating these systems into the design, but they're actively participating in the eventual form that the pieces take. And that's been incredibly beautiful to learn from these species. And no two species are alike. I worked with plants in the first one, and when I started to work with the shiitake, I realized it doesn't respond to me the way the plants would. I thought I gave it everything it needed to thrive, and it started to kind of shrivel and shrink, and I had to figure out why and adjust kind of what I was doing. So it's been an immense learning opportunity to really work with these and allow the designs to be co-authored by both the human and the non-human. And really, again, also, so one part of it is accommodating them and learning from them. Another one is that they exhibit their own level of intelligence that starts to inform and shift the work as well. So it's been immensely rewarding to collaborate across these species.
All right, awesome. Yeah, so I don't know if anyone has a question from the audience. I know Gustavo also was inquiring a little bit more on your practice overlap. Perhaps Gustavo can, ask himself what he would like to.
Sorry for the crazy hair. Hey, how are you? I was actually inspired by some of your futures work, and I wanted to understand a little bit about the mixed methodologies that you, it seems as though that you were trained in a mixed methodology, then in your own practice, you evolved it. And how has it changed over time? So like, what are the things you learned? What have you implemented? And then what are you doing now that's uniquely yours?
Great question. So as mentioned, what I was trained in was to create fictional worlds. And how that's different is really there's not many parameters or constraints on what you can imagine, which is great and freeing on one hand. But if I really truly wanted to impact change in this world, which is part of the reason why I created the lab, was that I was interested in taking some of the speculative nature of my own creative practice and seeing if there's any value of it in the real world. And so it is important for me that that these aren't just made in a vacuum as just acts of speculation for speculation's sake, but that there is some sort of impact that results from it. So in translating that to my creative practice, one of the things that was, I'll answer this in a number of ways, and you can stop me if I'm rambling. One of the things that was really interesting in my creative practice is the consultants that I engaged through this methodology and in developing my pieces, mostly from the sciences. I always thought that it was me that was going to benefit from the kind of knowledge of the scientists in making these prototypes function. And what was really rewarding was to see how the methodologies were actually opening up new ways of thinking about the scientific work on behalf of the scientists. And this happened when I was collaborating with Han Wosten on the shiitake piece. There was a whole area of questions that he started to pose in his own research. And so there was a really productive feedback loop. And I was interested in building a kind of incubator on campus through the lab where all these different disciplines can come together and utilize the same methodology to address some of the really critical questions that we're facing with regards to the climate crisis. So there I had to adapt some of put constraints, a little bit of constraints around, there's some things that don't have constraints in terms of the visioning programs we do with in terms of the future studies things. But others, they had to just kind of be formed to address specific questions connected to our context. The way in which it's evolved is that I think it's become broader and there's more tools and there's a different marriage of the different tools that were utilized in the past. But what's been really fascinating also is to see that it's actually applicable to multiple different scales. So I've worked with microscopic, there's a grant we got through the lab that's looking at microbial life. And the same kind of methodology was used to explore implications of the microbial on our kind of ecologies at the larger scale. it works in these highly speculative, creative works in my creative practice around the scale of the body. And it's also been really productive for students to think about actual territorial design at the ecological scale. And these, you know, everything from kind of role playing, I've had students come in as, you know, they designed in their, they essentially designed a new kind of entity that would oversee the park system. And they had to come in, they came in dressed up as these entities, and they had to kind of reflect on their design through embodied a role play of kind of role play method that was used there. We've done analysis of signals. So there's kind of a whole range from the highly creative, embodied, performative gameplay to more kind of analytical, analyzing signals, projecting kind of possible scenarios. And we use the range, and I kind of curate what we use based on who's in the room and the research question at hand. That was a really long-winded answer, but I hope that makes sense. I think you.
Yeah. And just one follow-up. How does the art and science component, because when you look at the fictional world, there has to be some understanding of the scientific implications. What
Yes.
kind of team or collaborators have you had in the past that facilitate that reality?
Great question. So each year through the lab, and I coordinate my teaching to topically relate to the lab, we've taken on different and specific climate systems, planetary systems. So the first year that I came into tenure track, the system was soil, our soil system. So there I had to bring in a soil scientist. I brought in people from anthropology. So it's one aspect of it is to ensure as vast of a cross-disciplinary engagement as possible, because we don't want just the scientific view. We want kind of multiple inputs. Another thing is to curate all the research questions. So the lab was investigating soils, the ecological studio, the climate-based studio was investigating soils, and the material work that we were engaging was looking at soils as well. And so all the different scales were grappling with that. The next year I taught it was our ocean system. So we shifted to water. The next year, right after COVID, it became the atmospheric systems. Then it was food systems. Last year it was waste systems. And this year, I don't yet know what the system is going to be, but it will be yet another kind of. And what's really interesting is not only curating the input from the experts and having the students doing the kind of ground up work in terms of the research and the design, but the fact that these systems are also interconnected. So obviously they're not in isolation. So the overtime knowledge that's gained from it is kind of greater than the individual kind of units added together.
Well, I just wanted to thank you very much for the wonderful lecture, and I really appreciate this organization, and I hope to go to that opening. Maybe you can repeat that at the end, but thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, that would be great, Aroussiak, if you could share a link down in our chat. It seems that some other people are also interested in attending some of these exhibitions in LA that are upcoming. That is probably all the time we have for today. I know I have many more burning questions, but I think the best way is to keep in touch, and everyone can check out Aroussiak's work on her website and follow that link there. And also, if everybody just remembers that our next event will be the World Building Workshop, AI and Feminism with Kadia. And this will be an online event on July 15th. So hopefully you all can join, and Aroussiak will hopefully join as well. So you can ask her more questions then, because we are really hoping she comes. So thank you, everyone. And have a wonderful evening, afternoon, or morning, wherever you are. Thank you so much.
And thanks for the questions. Bye.